The past few weeks have been made up of 10 ski days, 4 opening days, and tons of Stoke. From A Basin to Winter Park, Papa Joe to other homies, the early season has been off to a cranking start. I woke up feeling a bit under the weather, so in today's episode we talk about the GoPro settings that I use for skiing.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Season 3. Today I woke up not feeling super hot, to be honest, and I figured in an effort of self-preservation for this coming week, it would probably be best if I just didn't ski today. It is really cold here in Silverthorne and Dillon today, so rather than go up to A Basin in 10-15 degree weather and ski some groomers, I just thought it was in our best interest to lay low today, but still use this time to our advantage and talk about some other things that we've kind of discussed on the channel, but I haven't properly and formally addressed. As a continuation from the camera gear video I posted last week, some of you guys were interested in the settings I use for my GoPro, so in this video we are going to be talking about Hero 10 GoPro settings and GoPro Max settings that I use for skiing and for skiing only. No expert with GoPros by any means, but I've been using them since the Hero 2 came out, and it's really, of all the cameras I have, it's probably the camera I am most comfortable using in general. Take bits that you like and leave bits that you don't like, and just use the chapters below to kind of skip ahead to the part that's relevant to you. We are gonna start off with the GoPro Hero 10 because I figured this might be one of the more common cameras that people have, and I really use this camera for 4 main types of shots. The first one is just a standard vlogging shot, like me talking to the camera. The second scenario is more of like a cinematic, high frame rate, slow motion ski shot, which is probably what I use the camera the most for. The third instance is time lapse, and the fourth instance is actually photos, to take photos on the hill while I'm skiing. This is a great tool for that. So while this is not like an advanced video by any means, this might be a little bit more than a beginner video if you're just totally new to cameras and stuff like that. So having some background of this sort of stuff might help understand what I'm about to say. So within the GoPro, there is a feature called Protune, which essentially unlocks maximum capability for your camera. And my Protune settings essentially stay the same no matter what mode I'm in. So I'm gonna put the settings up on the screen right now so you guys can see what Protune settings I use, and I will briefly discuss why I use that setting so you have a better understanding of what's going on. In my opinion, Protune is essentially a cheat. It's a hack to just instantly get better quality footage. So if you're not using Protune, I would recommend at least turning it on, even if you do nothing else. The first setting here is called bitrate. Bitrate is essentially the amount of information and data that flows from the real world into the sensor. So I have this turned to high on all my modes because it just gives you right out of the box just higher quality footage if you're shooting in 2.7K and up. So the only time I would maybe use normal is if I'm really tight on space and I don't want bigger files. You could always flip this down to normal, but I always run high bit rate just to get that maximum image quality that I can. Shutter speed changes a lot in my situation, so I'm gonna skip over that for now and go back to shutter speed. EV compensation, depending on what your shutter speed is at, it might not let you change this, but if I'm running an auto shutter, I will usually run my EV comp down at -0.5 because the GoPro sometimes can struggle with the bright highlights. It has a tendency to kind of blow out the really bright parts of the image, so just by dropping this half a stop, it just ensures that I'm retaining all the detail in the snow, but that's not, not a huge deal, and I only find that I use this sometimes. So leaving this on 0 is also fine. White balance, I do usually set this to 5500 Kelvin, especially if it's just a bluebird day out. So keeping this at a fixed white balance just allows me to color grade it easily and match it to other cameras. So if it's really overcast, I might bump this up to something like 6000 Kelvin, but for the most part, 5500 Kelvin does the trick for me. ISO min and ISO max, I usually keep these both at 100. It just gives me a little bit cleaner of an image. I find that once you start to get over that 400, 800 ISO level on the GoPro, the image really starts to fall apart and it's hard to color grade and stuff like that. So leaving these lower, especially when you're outside, you just don't need a high ISO. So I will bump this up for stuff like shower scenes or anything like indoors where I just need a little bit extra bump, but for the most part, I'm leaving my ISO min and max at 100. The sharpness I dial down to low. The GoPro is kind of notorious for having like really outrageously high digital sharpening right out of the box. So by turning this to low, it kind of makes a little bit more of a flattering image in my opinion, and then I will add sharpening in post-processing in Adobe Premiere Pro. The color is probably one of the most impactful settings you could change. I shoot everything on flat color because I'm used to shooting stuff like this in log, so it extracts the maximum dynamic range. So by shooting my GoPro in flat, the footage comes out pretty, just not very vibrant, but also gives me the most room to work with in post-production. So by shooting in flat, it allows me to match it better to other cameras, and just gives me, you know, the most efficient sort of starting point to really bring out colors and maximize that dynamic range. So if you're not really into color grading and stuff like that, I recommend maybe keeping this at natural or even vibrant, give you that sort of really nice GoPro color that people are known for. But I love color grading. It's my favorite part of the entire filmmaking process, so I love shooting in flat on all my cameras. And then the last bit's raw audio I just keep off. I don't need a raw audio track. And then wind, I will typically keep on auto in case I do try to talk while I'm skiing. This kind of muffles out some of the wind, but if I'm in a contained spot, I might just swap this to stereo to get the best audio. So as I mentioned, those protune settings essentially never change. I might tweak white balance from here and there, ISO if I need to, but you know, 90% of the time, those are the settings I'm running for protune. First situation I want to talk about is just standard vlog shots to the camera. I usually shoot everything in 4K at 24 frames a second in the linear field of view. 4K, I find that the 4K is really nice in the GoPro, so just give me a little extra resolution. 24 frames a second is what I shoot all my stuff at, so just kind of gives you that most realistic and natural looking frame rate. And then I do use the linear lens mode just to kind of dull down the distortion that you can get with a GoPro. And if I don't need something super wide, there's no reason to necessarily shoot it like that. So linear just kind of takes off that really harsh GoPro look. I also shoot this in the 4:3 aspect ratio. 4:3 aspect ratio gives you a taller frame compared to the traditional 16:9 widescreen that this video is exported at and stuff like that. But the 4:3 uses more of the sensor and just gives me a little bit more room to move the clip up and down in case I cut my head off or something like that. So I shoot a lot of my GoPro stuff in 4:3 and then just punch in Premiere to make it fit the 16:9 frame. So super easy stuff, but I do find the 4:3 just gives me a little bit more versatility and buffer when I'm out on the hill. The second scenario I want to talk about is the slow motion cinematic ski shots, which again is probably my most common mode that I use. And for this, I'm using 2.7K in the 4:3 aspect ratio again at 120 frames a second. So to break these numbers down, the 2.7K is one stop below 4K, but a step above 1080. So it's kind of that nice balance of resolution. The 4:3 again is that vertical aspect ratio because I find when I'm shooting it on my pole, it's easy for me to cut off my ski. So by giving it a little bit more vertical frame and really make an effort to point the camera down towards my belly button, I can usually fit my whole body in a shot, but if I shot that in 16:9, I just want to have the latitude to wiggle the clip up and down. The frame rate at 120 frames a second gives me the ability to really slow the clip down by 5 times, conform it down to 24 frames a second, but also just gives me a lot of creative freedom to do cool speed ramping tricks where you see it go from like fast motion to then really slow and back to fast. And I love using this effect just in terms of my own creative style, stuff for like pow days, stuff to like emphasize a certain part of the run. It's a really cool trick that I use all the time. You could also use something like 60 frames a second, but for me, I just love that like really slow down, like you hit it, it's like, and then it speeds back up, and 60 frames for me just doesn't do it for action sports like skiing. So that is by far my most favorite mode. If I had a wish on the GoPro is that I could shoot 4K, 4:3, 120. In an effort to keep this video short, on the shorter side, I do use ND filters quite a bit as well, but I feel like that's kind of its own video in and of itself, but it essentially gives you that really natural looking motion blur. And just kind of gives your GoPro footage that little extra step above where people look at it and are like, was that really filmed with a GoPro? Because my GoPro stuff doesn't look like that. And like I mentioned, it's kind of an own little lesson in of itself, but I do love using the ND filters to just give you guys an even more immersive viewing experience. Another element that I use a lot in my videos are time lapses. I think it's such a cool way to portray the passing of time, sort of linking two different scenes together. So time lapses are a big part of my work. And I love how easy it is to shoot time lapses with the Hero 10. I can essentially shoot handheld time lapses, which is just something you were never able to do, but I could literally just take something like this and I just like rest it on my leg as I'm going up the chair. And for the most part, it produces a really stable time lapse just to kind of get something of the lift. So to shoot that, I'm shooting everything at 4K, 4:3 again in time warp mode. So this is kind of GoPro's like almost like a hyperlapse mode, to where it's essentially shooting a time lapse that's meant for moving at the same time. I don't really know how to explain it, but I find that it just does a really great job of producing a really smooth time lapse. So the time warp is a great feature that I'll use not even just on the mountain, but also driving around. Again, just a great element to throw into your films or your ski edits, whatever. Just a really cool thing that I think just helps the brain process connecting two different scenes together, and is something that I will always use in my videos. And the last scenario I use this little beast for, which you guys probably don't even see that much, is photos. Photo capabilities in a GoPro are just so crazy that you can shoot raw photos, burst modes, like you can really get some incredible photos. And for that, I typically will use the standard photo mode, but what's really nice about the photo mode now is that it comes with a timer. So I'll put on like a 3-second timer, I'll put it at the end of my ski pole, click the shutter button, put it out in front of me. I know I have 3, 2, 1, boom, and then it takes the photo. So it makes it a little bit easier, where on older GoPros, you'd have to go to like time-lapse mode, put it on 5 seconds so it would shoot raw, and then like you'd come out with a bunch of photos. But this way it kind of simplifies the process, and you can shoot raw photos, which is just like, it's like mind-blowing how powerful and how much dynamic range you can get in a single GoPro file. So the other mode that's really cool to use, and I encourage you guys to try it, is the burst mode. There's a bunch of different intervals you can shoot at. My favorite is the 10 photos in 1 second mode. And it still shoots raw photos, which is just nuts. For something this size, to be able to shoot 10 raw photos in a second is so cool. So you can put the timer on, and then boom, you can fire 10 photos in 1 second. So whether you're hitting a rail or maybe you're doing a jump or whatever, you can really get a really nice sequence of shots, and that way you can ensure that you do get a cool shot. So I usually miss 9 of the 10, but the point is that you get one banger shot in there. So I love using the GoPro for photos. My only regret is that I don't use it enough because I'm so focused on video. Every time I take GoPro photos, I'm like, boom. And then a pro tip is you put an ND filter on the front and take photos, and it's like you get that really cool motion blur. The snow looks like it's whizzing past the camera. Lesson on ND filters, kind of TBD, but those are the 4 instances I find myself using my GoPro Hero 10 in. Moving on to the GoPro Max, this camera from a setting standpoint is actually quite simple, and I will say that most of the work for the Max is done in editing, it's done in the GoPro app, it's done in, you know, whatever reframing technique that you use, but the actual settings themselves, there's really not too much to it. In order to extract a good image, it all comes down to editing. So my settings for the GoPro Max that I use, the first thing is that I shoot everything in 360 mode. You guys asked me, am I shooting my head cam on Hero mode or 360 mode? Everything I shoot is in 360 mode. It just gives me more flexibility. If I want a Hero image, I can always just render it out into a Hero like field of view, but you can't go from a Hero field of view to 360. So being a solo operator, doing everything run and gun on the fly, like my head cam is the one thing that I just can't mess up. So that's why I love using 360 mode, and that's why I'll probably never go to not using a 360 camera in general. So you really only have 2 options on the Max. You either have 3K 60 frames a second or 5.6K at 24 or 30 frames a second. I shoot everything at 5.6K, 24 frames a second. I found that I just don't need slow motion or the extra frames for my head cam. And then coming down to protune settings, which we talked about with the Hero 10, it's essentially all the same stuff. So it's really cool because I can match these cameras super easily. I can almost use the same exact LUT and color grade on the Hero 10 and Max footage. So it really helps me in the post-processing and editing situation. So shutter speed, I just leave to auto, let the Max do all the exposing. EV comp, I also typically leave at 0. Sometimes I will dial this down to half a stop, but I find that the Max actually, in my opinion, seems to have a little bit better dynamic range than the Hero 10 for whatever reason. I don't know if that's scientifically accurate, but I find that leaving this at 0 does the trick. White balance, again, I will change this to 5500 Kelvin just so my footage looks, you know, snow looks nice and white. I can match it to everything else easily. ISO min and ISO max, leaving it at 100. Want the cleanest footage. Sharpness, again, I leave at low. I add the sharpness in post. Color, also put it to flat, so you can color grade it really easily, maximize that dynamic range. And then for the audio, I do 360 plus stereo. That way it's pulling audio from both sides of the camera, both parts. So I find that this gives me some pretty good audio to work with. The other mode that I use all the time on the Max and is one of my favorite things to shoot are 360 time warps. Time lapses similar to the Hero 10, but this, it's like you can just get really cool shots, especially when linked up with a big pole. You can, you know, do a time lapse that starts off looking behind you, then goes to look in front of you. You can do time lapses like just all over. I mean, the possibilities are literally endless with a 360 camera. So for the 360 time warp, again, I'm using 360 mode, 5.6K resolution. All the protune settings are the same. And then I typically will just change the speed depending on what it is I'm filming. If I'm shooting like a car time lapse, I will bump the speed up to something like 30 times. But if I'm just shooting a lift real quick and it's only gonna be a few minutes, I will have to use something like 5X, just shorten down that duration. But you know, knowing what situation, what setting to use in what situation, I think pays dividends to get the footage that you want. But like I mentioned, you also need to know how to edit it. Once you shoot it with that, okay, what are you gonna do with it and how can you use it to get the results that you want, or else everything's gonna kind of look the same and you're gonna come back and be like, dude, I did that, but my footage only looks like this. So the last time I did this video, I had a Hero 7 and it's all the same principles. You just have different features and capabilities. So that's why I encourage you to actually take some time to learn about resolution, learn about frame rates, learn about shutter speed and how it affects your image. I can't just simply tell you, use these settings and this is what's gonna happen. You need to have an understanding of what's going on, or else it's just not gonna, you're only gonna get half the equation. So I know everyone just wants like the easy route. What do I need to do? Like, but it just, unfortunately, life doesn't work that way. I'm here to help you guys. So hopefully that sheds some light on it, but let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you'd want to see more of like an editing tutorial, almost like a part 3 of like, once we shoot this, then what do we do with it? Yeah, I'm hoping I feel better because I'm trying to hit up Vail opening day tomorrow. And so yeah, apologies for not skiing today, but I think this was just a better move in the long run. So appreciate you guys watching. Take it easy, fam. I'll see all you guys tomorrow. Peace out.